did some Q&A today. This first round, there's quite a few questions, and so we're breaking them up into chunks, hopefully in a way that makes sense and is interesting or helpful, or at least answers your questions. So got the 3 questions today, and so we'll talk about why I got sick the way I did, if I had tested positive for COVID, and why I was not hospitalized. So those are the 3 we're covering today, and we'll go over another chunk of them next time. Thank you all for waiting your turn to have your questions answered, and thank you for asking them. All right, let's dive in. Sick. That is the big question that we have not been able to find an answer to. Before getting sick, I was a long distance runner. Loved long distance, pretty much anything. Hiking, swimming, biking. If I was going to be doing a sport, endurance was the way that I loved to do it. And instead of driving somewhere, I would often choose to run or walk. My husband actually knew that I was pregnant with my first son, our first son. I went into labor, and he knew that it was like real go time when I said that I couldn't walk there, because we had just walked to and from our birthing class, which was pretty far away, the night before. So yeah, I loved to use my body. I was kind of the epitome of health and healthy living. Ate all organic, juiced smoothies, high vegetable content in our diet, healthy local, animals when we ate meat. Grew a lot of our own food, and just lived a super healthy life, and also just had a super healthy body, with the exception of stuff that was there because of complex trauma that happened throughout my childhood. Everything other than that was within my control was really healthy. So like the month before we got sick with COVID in March of 2020, we had just gotten 2 puppies, and we had in that month taken those puppies everywhere just because we wanted to include them in our life and how we lived our life. And so we took them to the beach, we took them skiing with us multiple times, we took them on walks and hikes, took them to our favorite, our favorite little 14-mile hike, and carried them when they would let us, but usually they would just wiggle their way out. And our kids played, in addition to all kind of the stuff we did as a family. My youngest son was literally just about to start his first year of Little League in baseball. My older son had played baseball, had been on swim team, did soccer, and so it fell into none of the categories and that this is not unusual to my experience with long COVID. This is what I've heard from many of the people that I now know have long COVID. They were the healthiest people they knew. Very fit athletes, took care of their bodies, and this happened. We have done so much testing. We continue to do more testing. We've done all the testing possibly covered by insurance, and we have also done testing not covered by insurance, and we continue to do that. I just did another round of testing to see if we could find some other possible underlying reason of why I got so sick and continue to remain so sick and have such a difficult time with treatments. So that is it. Yeah, that's kind of the root kind of thing of what we're digging for, as we hope to find something that will help. So, when I was actually working out, when I first heard about COVID, I saw it on the news because the TVs were on in the gym. And then Kendall and I started talking about it, and we homeschool our kids. We did then, and we had a lot of big group activities that we went to. And so we had made the decision to stop going to them. We don't know why, but we just had, none of the stuff said that I was at risk. Like I said earlier, our lifestyle and my health did not indicate that I or, the kids were at risk, or Kendall, for having anything serious. But both of us just had a feeling that it would not be good for me. And so we stopped going to big group activities and just any indoor stuff. So this was before lockdown, a few weeks before. The one thing we didn't stop doing was going to the grocery store. And this was before, masks were really being communicated in the United States that was how to stop it from spreading. So we hand sanitized a lot, but that wasn't how it was spreading. So that's how we think I got sick, is at the grocery store, but we don't know. COVID. Nope, I have not ever tested positive for COVID. I have only had COVID once, and and it was at the very beginning of lockdown. And once is all that it has taken to get me this sick. Kendall, I've shared this before, but Kendall and the kids, they got sick and had fevers and were really fatigued and just completely knocked out. And I didn't have a fever. And I had, what I had was just scratchy, dry burning in my chest that just kept getting worse every day, to the point that by the end of the week, I was really struggling to breathe. So we went to urgent care. I went to urgent care and they said it was probably the flu. When they tested me, all the different tests that you can do for the flu, and they were all negative, they said that it was some virus going around and anxiety. And they were making fun of all the people who were afraid of COVID, including me. And this is not an unusual story. Like, people are shocked when they hear it, and it's shocking because it's wrong, but it's not shocking because it's unusual. It's extremely common, and especially it's been extremely common for people who have had long COVID to be treated like this. I then, 2 days later, went to the emergency room, told them I thought it was COVID, told them I couldn't breathe. They did an ultrasound on my lungs to see if there was fluid in there. Because there was not fluid in there, they were only looking for pneumonia. They told me again that it was the flu, and I said, I've tested negative for the flu, and they're like, well, maybe it's still the flu, or just some virus that's going on. It kept being like some virus that's going around. And the virus that was going around was the one that was shutting down the whole entire world, and that was COVID, and I couldn't get a test for it. Because the person told me that even people in the ICU were struggling to get tests for COVID at that time. And I was given inhalers. I was given lots of cough medicine, even though I never had a cough. And cough has been documented in all of my charts, but I've just not had a cough. And they told me to take Advil, and they told me to meditate because it was anxiety. They said to come back if I couldn't breathe. I said, I am here because I can't breathe. And they told me to come back if I started to turn blue. So went home, and that my husband and kids were driving me to and from these appointments. And then, so just tried to wait it out. And they said, in 2 weeks, it should be gone. Whatever it is, it should be gone. After 2 weeks, I was struggling all day long to breathe. It just kept getting worse and worse. More symptoms started to show up, and I went to urgent care again. Was told that it was bronchitis this time, even though I've had bronchitis before and it was nothing like that. They said it was probably just bronchitis. They did a chest x-ray, which was again looking for fluid, and there was no fluid. I didn't have fluid. It was the virus was in my lungs and in the tissues, causing this burning sensation, which is one of the symptoms of COVID. So that is when I went to the emergency room, we were all really afraid. We didn't know what it was going to be like. My husband didn't know if he was going to see me again or not. He gave my his phone number to the nurse there and just said to call if there are any updates. And they proceeded to, in my presence, make fun of him for being scared. And just making fun of him for giving them phone number because he wanted to know what was going to be happening with his wife. And he was afraid that I was going to die because we were all afraid of that. And that turned out to be a very real fear. And it continues to be a real concern. And it wasn't until I reached out to my primary care physician, who I hadn't even thought to reach out to because I literally had only gone to her for being pregnant, because she's also a midwife. And so I reached out to her, said, I was told I have bronchitis. It is not going away. I can't breathe. And we had an appointment. I told her all my symptoms, and she goes, every single symptom you listed is a COVID symptom. So I feel 100% certain that I did have COVID, even though one of the horrible things is because I did not have a positive COVID test because there were no tests available. It is still noted as a question mark, despite the fact of what I have been through. So, and later when I went to see a cardiopulmonologist, she said that there were people who were in the ICU testing negative for COVID, and when they did scopes, like biopsies of their lungs, they found COVID in the tissues of their lungs. So that is the answer to, did I have a positive COVID test? No. Did I have COVID? 100% yes. So the first is I was not hospitalized because I was not believed. And I have not had closer medical supervision because that has not been available to me. My doctor, my primary care physician, Kendall, and I have done all the different stuff we can. Just the other day, I looked at emails and texts from early weeks of reaching out to her and being sick with COVID, and just describing how one symptom after another just kept accumulating. The breathing was one of the biggest, scariest ones, just because it affected every second of my day. And if I wasn't thinking about breathing, I wasn't breathing. And Kendall would check on me in the morning, and the kids would check on me in the morning to see if I was still alive. And, Kendall and I said goodbye to each other at one point, just not knowing if I was going to wake up the next day. And that is what we lived through. And I think that a lot of people don't know what it was like in the early days of the pandemic, for people who are ill, or forget about it. But even before reaching out to, or while reaching out to my doctor, it's a little fuzzy. It was around those first few weeks, especially, were just crazy trying to find somebody to help. The hospitals were sending out these little questionnaires that to take them to know whether you were sick with the flu or with COVID, and whether you should be home or go to the hospital. And every single time I took one of those questionnaires, in the middle of it, a big red alert would pop up and say, go to the hospital immediately. And the problem is that questionnaire was more, informed than the doctors were, unfortunately. The doctors, even friends of mine that were doctors, told me it was allergies. They heard me, they saw me, they told me it was allergies and anxiety. It was one doctor after another. My primary care physician was the first person to believe me. And everywhere was sad that I had COVID symptoms, so I couldn't come in anywhere. And no one would actually acknowledge, though, that I had COVID and help me, except for my doctor. I called even the city to see if I could get in. I didn't know what to do. It was horrible, and it was terrifying, and I could feel how horribly sick I was, and I had never been sick like that before. I knew it was not the flu. I knew it was not bronchitis. I knew 100% it was not anxiety, because that's not what anxiety does. It does not cause your lungs to feel like they have a chemical burn and you can't breathe and you fall asleep and you wake up gasping. And so, one, the hospitals would not help, and two, because they weren't believing and they were being so ignorant, I wouldn't have been safe at the hospital. I wouldn't have gotten the treatment that I needed. And even people who did end up getting hospitalized that have long COVID, they were sent home when they were still really, really sick. Once they were off ventilators, and that the doctors were like, that's all we can do for you, they were sent home. That's how that went. It was not like, oh, you stay there till you're really well and getting back on your feet. It's once you're off life support, you're on your own to figure out everything else that's horribly happening to your body. So we texted and called and had appointments with my doctor every day, sometimes a couple times a day. I mean, at least a couple times a week, depending on how things were going and how the things we were trying were working. It was before anyone knew anything about long COVID, and we were finding our way through this terrifying illness with absolutely no information. And I'm really grateful that I have such a committed and intelligent and compassionate and empathetic doctor that is human and acts like a human and really, really listens, which is what too many doctors do not do. And once I started taking nebulized glutathione, which is the only thing that was helping me with breathing, we had tried steroids and inhalers and steroid inhalers and so many things, and nothing was working. And the nebulized glutathione was the only thing that was helping my lungs. I couldn't have done that in the hospital. I remember emailing my doctor at one point saying, I'm really scared. I don't have the skills to keep me alive, and we don't know what we're doing. And it was around that time that we started to hear about other people having long COVID. And that began to open our eyes a little bit to what might be going on with my body, although it's still, we don't really have answers to that. It was more that it opened our eyes to this was not just me, because we could not figure out how. I was like, I had never heard of this. I had never heard of anybody else having it. It was not on the news anywhere. And we, through a friend, found out about other people, and my doctor at the same time was doing her own research, and she ended up finding about other doctors who were also keeping patients alive at home. And we began to find out about this disease called long COVID that affects me and the kids, and I mean, in many ways it affects Kendall as well, not just because he takes care of us, but he has stuff that pops up and health complications now because of it that he did not have before. So that is it for today's Q&A for long COVID. Thank you for watching and taking the time to learn. These ones are definitely my experience, but I also know that they're not unique to me, just having heard other people, a lot of other people with long COVID tell them. In fact, when I went to see my cardiopulmonologist in June, I believe, of 2020 it was, I couldn't speak, and I had typed out my my need, my symptoms, why I was there, and I handed it to her, and she had asked to keep that because she says, you are the 5th woman that I have seen this week. All the same stuff, like my age, previously healthy. She said 2 or 3 of them were nurses. They had gone to the ER, like everything was the exact same. Burning in the chest, unable to breathe. You know, if you weren't thinking about it, you weren't breathing. And this was, and she was like, do you think this is related to COVID? And I said, yes. And this is a cardiopulmonologist asking this. And so, and my doctor had already known about long COVID, and that just shows like the lack of education, but it also shows how many people were having the exact same experience that I was. So it's not unique at all that just, she had seen people that same week, 5 women that were, went for help and did not get it. Thank you for listening.